Hey everybody, this is a series of videos providing a statement analysis of the words spoken by Andrew Windsor in his interview with Emily Maitlis from BBC Newsnight. I share the transcripts on screen and provide subtitles of my commentary. I hope you find this analysis interesting. Let me know in the comments. Here we go. Emily says, "You seem utterly convinced you're telling the truth. Would you be willing to testify or give a statement under oath if you were asked?" Andrew replies, "Well, I'm like everybody else, and and I would have to take all the legal advice that there was before I was to do that sort of thing. But if push came to shove and the legal advice was to do so, then I would be duty-bound to do so."
If push came to shove and the legal advice was to do so, then I would be duty-bound to do so.
Emily indicates that she does not believe Andrew is telling the truth with this comment, "You seem utterly convinced you're telling the truth." She doesn't say, "I'm convinced you're telling the truth." She doesn't say, "You seem to be telling the truth." And she doesn't ask, "Are you telling the truth?" So either Emily is not aware of the implications of what she has said, or it could be a deliberate hook to see how Andrew responds to what is an indirect accusation that she and others may not believe he is telling the truth. We would expect an innocent person to respond to Emily's barb with some indignation, perhaps saying something like, "I'm not convinced I'm telling the truth. I am telling the truth." But Andrew doesn't do this and instead completely ignores the invitation to affirm that he is telling the truth. In fairness to Andrew, Emily again does not give him chance to respond to the first part of her statement and follows it with a question which Andrew does try to answer. To what is a simple yes-no closed question, "Would you be willing to testify under oath?" Andrew does not give a simple yes-no answer. Instead, he starts by hiding behind other people, saying, "I'm like everyone else," which indicates he is not confident in what he is about to say and needs to bolster his position by bringing in other people needlessly, except to hide behind. He uses various distancing mechanisms to successfully avoid answering the question. He could just have said, "I will take legal advice," but he exaggerates by saying, "I would have to take all the legal advice there was," which sounds like it could be quite a lengthy process, or perhaps even an unending process. When will he know that he has taken all the legal advice there is? Thus, he's creating an unspecified amount of distance between himself and testifying. He also uses conditional language, "would have to," rather than saying "I will," which further distances and weakens his claim that he will testify. Then he reduces the solemn task of testifying under oath to "that sort of thing," distancing himself even further from telling the truth under oath. Next, he vaguely states if push came to shove, indicating that he would consider testifying if the situation became so bad there was no alternative. However, he even distances himself from this by saying he would only do so if his lawyers advised him to. So what he's telling us is there could be a scenario where the situation was as bad as it could get, and still he wouldn't testify if his lawyers told him not to. Finally, he says, If the situation was so bad, and if his lawyers advised him to testify, then he would be duty-bound to do so. Stating he would be duty-bound to do so depends entirely on what his definition of duty is, and then on whether he is someone who would honour his duty or not. On the evidence from Andrew to date, we can conclude that he has a dubious sense of duty, and honouring his duty is not something that he does reliably. So this whole answer is a smoke and mirrors obfuscation, from which Andrew has revealed in his language that he has no intention of giving a statement or testifying under oath. The last point I will make on this section is the loss of verbal fluency, which has become a hallmark in this interview of whenever Andrew is not speaking from experiential memory and likely in storytelling fabrication mode. There is a point where Andrew seems to choke on the words legal advice. Some would say this is just a coincidence, and others would analyse more deeply and say it was no coincidence, and his choking on these particular words at this point implies that the legal ramifications are of great sensitivity and anxiety to Andrew. You can obviously decide for yourself which you think is the most likely. We should note that at no point in his answer does he say yes, he would be willing to testify under oath. Emily continues, because you said there are many unanswered questions. Everyone affected wants closure. You would help to provide that closure? Andrew replies, if there was, if in the right circumstances, yes, I would, because I think there's just as much unclosure for me as there is for everybody else. And undoubtedly some very strange and unpleasant activities have been going on.
Because I think there's just as much closure for me as there is for everybody else.
Andrew indicates further obstacles to him testifying, using the conditional if twice and only saying yes, I would, rather than saying yes, I will. This use of conditional language lacks commitment, as it sets unnamed conditions, meaning there are circumstances where he would potentially testify, but other circumstances where he won't, and he's not telling us what the latter circumstances are. Again, he doesn't say yes, he will give testimony under oath anywhere. The next thing to point out is Andrew's self-concern and lack of any demonstrated concern for the victims of SA. The reason he gives for potentially testifying is because of his need for closure in relation to unanswered questions, though I failed to see how he could get any closure from his own testimony when he already has all that information. How is he going to get closure from that? If Andrew has any outstanding questions, then his own testimony is not going to give him any answers that he doesn't already have. So the type of closure that he might be referring to is to have the case closed, to get it off his back, for him to be left alone and not have it hanging over him anymore. That type of closure. In any case, it is self-centered and narcissistic of him to only consider giving testimony because of what he will potentially get from it, and to hell with everybody else. Finally, instead of stating explicitly use of minors, he uses softening, distancing and minimizing language by saying very strange and unpleasant activities. So far in the interview, which is about use of minors, Andrew has not uttered these words once. This is very telling. It shows how avoidant he is, and such avoidance is something that we generally associate with guilty knowledge and deception. Andrew continues, "I'm afraid to say that I'm not the person who can shed light on it for a number of reasons, one of which is that I wasn't there long enough. If you go in for a day, 2 days at a time, it's quite easy, I'm led to believe, for those sorts of people to hide their activities for that period of time and then carry on when you're not there."
I'm afraid to say that I'm not the person who can shed light on it for a number of reasons.
What is the it Andrew refers to? He doesn't tell us, so it could be anything. He says there are a number of reasons he can't shed light on it, but then only mentions the one reason of him not being there long enough. These are orphan statements. He hasn't told us where there is, nor what it is, and so what he is saying is unreliable due to lack of specificity, and it's actually meaningless. Andrew tries to explain why him not being there long enough is a good reason why he can't shed light on it, which is because people could hide their activities for the period that he's there and carry on when he's not there. This is just not feasible, and it indicates not that Andrew didn't know what was going on, but that he accepts it was going on, and he is trying to persuade that Epstein removed all traces of it when Andrew was there and then put everything back after he'd gone. It seems that it is only Andrew who cannot see the absurdity of what he is suggesting. That sort of concealing behaviour might happen in advance of being visited by the police, but if it was necessary to do that for a guest, I would propose that such guests would not be invited nor welcomed in the first place. According to Andrew's own words in this interview, he stayed at Epstein's houses even when Epstein wasn't there. That sounds like someone who was deeply trusted, and it does not sound like the sort of guest from whom illegal SA activities would need to be concealed. Emily asks, "What was your response on hearing that he died?" Andrew replies, "Shock." Emily then says, "Some people think that he didn't take his own life." Andrew replies, "Well, there again, I'm not one to be able to answer that question. I believe that centres around something to do with a bone in his neck. As to whether or not, if you decide that bone breaks or something. But I'm afraid to say I'm not an expert. I have to take what the coroner says, and he has ruled that it was so."
Well, there again, I'm not one to be able to answer that question.
Andrew replies with the single word shock to describe his response to hearing Epstein had died. I actually find this reply quite shocking in how brief and devoid of any emotion it is. He doesn't even include the word I to say I was shocked. Plus, he says the word shock almost before Emily has finished the question, indicating no processing time for him to think about his answer. I suspect this is an example of Andrew saying what he thinks he should say, and that he's not being truthful about how he reacted on learning the news Epstein had. This is backed up by the fact that, though he is professing to recall being shocked, this is not portrayed in his body language or tone of voice, and indeed, in the very next breath, he laughs, considering whether Epstein took his own life or not. Whatever Epstein may have been, laughing around the subject of his death and potential is never appropriate and shows Andrew's insensitivity and inability to read the room. Then Andrew goes into a bizarre diversion tactic where he tries to explain how to tell if someone has taken their own life or not, but he concedes that he is not an expert. So why even try to reference medical information when he ended up saying he has to take what the coroner concluded, and that is that it was. This is perhaps one of the clearest indications that Andrew is accustomed to pointlessly talking on subjects he knows little about, and that he narcissistically likes the sound of his own voice. Next, Emily asks, Ghislaine Maxwell was, victims say, complicit in his behaviour. Do you think she has questions to answer about her role? Andrew replies, well, in the same way that I have questions to answer, in the sense of what was I doing, and as I say, that I was there to my mind, be honourable and say to him, look, you've been convicted, it would be incompatible for me to be seen with you. Unfortunately, somebody with a camera got a photograph of us.
It would be incompatible for me to be seen with you, unfortunately.
Andrew was asked about Maxwell, but immediately turns it to talk about himself, indicating avoidance of discussing Maxwell's role. Pertinently, he doesn't say, I don't know what her role was. He just starts discussing himself. Then, in his answer, he demonstrates that he seems to have fundamentally misunderstood the purpose of this interview. He indicates in this answer that he thinks it is just about the photograph of him and Epstein walking in the park. Hence, he goes into his rehearsed and now proven to be false story, but he was there for the sole purpose to break up the friendship. He was asked about Maxwell having questions to answer. He wasn't asked to rehash his already stated excuse for staying with Epstein for 4 days after Epstein was released from prison as a convicted offender. That he does so, I believe, is an indication that Andrew is either purposefully misdirecting or he seriously missed the point of the interview. This interview was supposed to be about VR's allegations against Andrew, that he had essayed her and that he had known about Epstein's sex trafficking. The photograph of him and Epstein is just one piece of evidence that drew the world's attention to the fact that Andrew continued to associate with a convicted SA offender after he was released from prison. The photograph isn't the issue. The 4-day stay isn't the issue. The issue is he has been accused of SA himself by VR, and he had a long-standing friendship with Epstein, and he has been implicated in at least having knowledge of and more seriously participating in the use of young women in Epstein's houses. Andrew continues, if there are questions that Ghislaine has to answer, that's her problem, I'm afraid. I'm not in a position to be able to comment one way or the other.
If there are questions that Ghislaine has to answer, that's her problem, I'm afraid. I'm not in a position.
Again, when talking about Epstein and Maxwell, 2 people that he was friends with for many years, he doesn't express any disappointment in them or condemn them. He doesn't take the opportunity to make a supportive statement towards the victims. He just comments without any emotion or demonstrating any understanding towards anyone. What I find quite repugnant about his answer in relation to Maxwell is how blasé and unsympathetic he is by saying that's her problem. This was someone he was supposedly friends with for years, and he has no hesitation in completely disowning her. Although he is correct, it is her problem. It's such a callous and ugly thing to say, in my opinion, and gives him away as self-serving, treacherous, and disloyal, without a shred of compassion for other people. What a terrible friend, perhaps proving the saying, there's no honour among thieves, to be true. People who behave criminally cannot be trusted to act honourably towards one another. Emily says, Epstein is... The women are now being heard. Andrew replies, quite rightly.
Yes.
The women are now being heard.
Quite rightly.
This is an example, in my opinion, of pure virtue signalling by Andrew. He clearly doesn't mean this, and from everything he has said in this interview, he does not believe it either. He spends the interview, both before and after this statement from Emily, denying the reality of the victims and attempting to silence them with his denials, and not expressing any empathy or understanding in relation to their experience. He can't, on the one hand, say that it is quite right that the women are being heard, and then so blatantly not only not hear, but deny the very reality of what the women and his own accuser are saying. Emily asks what effect all this has had on your close family. You've got daughters of your own. Andrew replies, it has been what I would describe as a constant sore in the family. We all knew him, and I think that if we have a conversation about it, we're all left with the same thing of what on earth happened? How did he get to where he was? What did he do? How did he do it? And so it's just a constant sort of gnaw.
And well, how did he get to where he was? What did he do? How did he do it?
Andrew's answer to this question goes over a few clips, but in all of them, he talks about we and doesn't distinguish between himself and his immediate family. This indicates the problem that I believe Andrew has with boundaries, where he doesn't know where he ends and other people begin. Amongst many things, this porous boundary issue is a characteristic of people who are entitled and who exploit others for their own ends. And this can include being exploitative. Andrew can't speak for how any other person feels about the accusations against him, but this is precisely what he does. He could say, for example, my daughters have been deeply upset, they don't like to talk about it, their mother is very angry and tends to rant, whatever was the situation. However, he does not answer the question except to lump everyone in together as we and us, and this is another example of him hiding his guilt, in my opinion, behind other people and concealing information. Emily asks what effect this has had on his close family, and she specifically references his daughters, but Andrew does not talk about them separately from himself. He just states it as being what I would describe as a constant sore in the family. He doesn't even personalise it by using any pronouns, for example, my family or our family. He doesn't explain how his daughters have been affected at all. Although we can assume that the family refers to his family, he isn't telling us it is his family. So from all this, we can conclude that there is no real emotional connection to what he's saying. He is not being truthful, and he hasn't answered the question. His response is impersonal, distancing, and unreliable. He goes on to say, if they have a conversation about it, they are all left with the same thing. Well, it is implausible that each member of his family will think and feel exactly the same way, so this is certainly an unreliable statement. Then, when we look at what he says are the same things that they are all left with, he provides a series of questions not related to his behaviour and what he's been accused of, but only relating to Epstein's behaviour. Again, this is Andrew trying to avoid his culpability and failing to acknowledge that this interview should be about him, not Epstein. The questions he is trying to assert that all his family ask are: what on earth happened? How did he get to where he was? What did he do? How did he do it? All these questions are highly suspect to me, and not the sort of questions that innocent people would ask on learning that someone is an SA offender and accused of trafficking minors. I don't believe for 1 second that they are questions asked by any of Andrew's immediate family. They are, in my opinion, Andrew's disingenuous questions designed purely to try to give the impression that he didn't know what was happening. But there is a problem, because he knows what happened. We all do. Epstein trafficked young women, committed multiple counts of SA and got caught. The same answer applies to the second question he asked. How did he get to where he was? This also is not a genuine question, because we all know how he got to where he was. Epstein trafficked young women, committed multiple acts of SA against them, and got caught. The last two questions, what did he do and how did he do it, I would propose that only a voyeuristic person with propensities towards sexual deviancy would even think to ask or want to know the answer to these questions. Innocent people would be repulsed and not have any curiosity about what Epstein did, nor how he did it. These last two questions are from Andrew's mind. In my opinion, all they reveal is Andrew's own sexual deviancy. In his attempt to convince us that he doesn't know what Epstein did, nor how he did it, he has revealed the opposite and shown us his preoccupation with thinking about the illegal sex that Epstein engaged in, i.e., what he did and how he did it. Further, Andrew does not express one shred of revulsion or condemnation about the crimes committed by Epstein.